Um, I'd like to, first thank the organizers in the Yukon Chamber of Mines for inviting me here today. I think we've all heard in the news recently of this Yukon BC Grid Connect project and the recent announcement by the Prime Minister. I think there's a bit of a buzz around the community, and obviously with respect to critical minerals and development and economic benefit, I think we're all heading in the right direction. Today I'm going to give you an update on the BC Yukon Grid project. That's what I'm here for. But I think one of the key messages is that this really is about a shared grid, and it is about shared benefits. Well, that's me. It says that I'm the President CEO of Yukon Development Corporation, and I have a bit of utility experience. I'll just move on because there are time constraints. So I definitely obviously want to acknowledge that we're on the traditional territory of Kwanlin Dun First Nation and Tonquachin Council. But as I mentioned before, shared grids, shared benefits, this project is about partnership. And it's about community benefit, and that's at the core of this project. And so I've got the logos of all 14 First Nations, because directly or indirectly, I think we're all going to share in the benefits that this project's going to provide in the future. Relating this to security, again, I mean, there's a strong correlation with this project and security in the north. And when I read, and had conversations with multiple individuals, this quote really resonated with me. And really, security is not about borders or boots on the ground. It's about safe housing, strong infrastructure, clean energy, climate resilience, and the ability to govern ourselves in our territories. This is from the former AFN Yukon Regional Chief, Kluwadi Anabek. And you can see how this is directly related to our project. Strong infrastructure, clean energy, climate resilience. Right now we have Asia with low water situation in the Yukon. When we have a grid connect, this does make us more resilient to climate change, as an example. It may even, as we look through the project benefits, enable us to alter the operating parameters of the hydro facilities in the Yukon such that they're less impacted. That's not a guarantee yet, but that is something we are going to look at in the future. So again, we share our path forward. Meaningful partnerships. I've said from the start, we've had multiple conversations, sent multiple letters to First Nations, and partnerships are at the very core of this project. We've said we want First Nations involved with this project from the ground up, and that's what we've been doing. We've been meeting with First Nations since we've signed the agreements, and we've had great progress, but obviously we need to continue in our approach. And during a panel yesterday that I was on, the key things I mentioned were trust and time. We have to be out there earning trust, and it takes time to do so. So we need to continue in that and earn those relationships and build that, continue to build that trust. Values driven, this needs to be built on Yukoners' values, also First Nations. Cultural integrity, we obviously need First Nations at the table to understand their cultures, to incorporate that into the project as we build and move forward. And lastly, reconciliation is a significant component of this as we look at historic economic reconciliation and the financing modeling as building that out over the next few months. So again, sharing. Unfortunately, we all share in energy challenges. This is reiterated over and over and over again. We do have a isolated grid. We have winter capacity challenges. That's why we have rental generators. That's why Yukon Energy is putting in the permanent White Horse Power Centers, or First Nations partners putting in the White Horse Power Centers. We have a demand that's rising. We're predicting from residential customers only alone over 30% by 2035. And that doesn't include all of the exciting conversation today or this past week around mining. When we look at casino, arguably, I think, or debate, it's probably 200 megawatts of additional load. Fireweed, BMC, Sitka, you know, all of these entities are going to add to the load that we already have. And of course, there are limits to new wind and solar having an isolated grid. We do have a pause right now, unfortunately. But with a Grid Connect project, we would be looking at, you know, the ability to connect a significant amount of intermittent renewables because of the stability tied to a bigger North American grid system. The next piece, though, is of course, we do all share in the challenges, but of course, you know, the big thing and the area that we are focused on is really sharing in the opportunity, and this opportunity for a new energy economy. And what I mean by that is, with a Grid Connect, it facilitates, you know, the development of renewable energy potential and projects. In that, right now we have a summer surplus, and I'll show you some diagrams in a minute, where we have nowhere to put it. We have a Grid Connect project, that summer surplus all of a sudden goes south and we have a market for it. If you look at Manitoba Hydro, if you look at Hydro-Quebec, they have amongst the lowest rates in Canada. I'm not saying Grid Connect is going to lower rates, but I would be willing to say that it's going to stabilize our rates in the future. As we build it, as we get it in service, and as we grow our economy through the development of other renewable energy sources. So I think everyone's kind of heard about what this is, I believe, and I'll say welcome to the Northwest Critical Conservation Corridor. It was kind of, this was thrown at us. We were trying and scrambling to understand what this really meant. Here's a quote from Prime Minister Carney, but I do have a video next, and I'm quite certain he can explain it better than I, so I will actually play that now if it goes.
The Northwest Corridor has extraordinary potential to unlock critical minerals development, clean power transmission, all under Indigenous leadership. We're talking tens of billions of dollars of investments, and in parallel, creating a new conservation area the size of Greece. The corridor involves building new transmission lines, upgrading highways, installing fiber and cell towers, and investing in communities, ports, and railways. By doing so, we'll strengthen our position as a global leader in clean energy and a leader in critical minerals. But more broadly, the Northwest Transmission Line will anchor clean energy industrial corridor for generations. And it has the potential to be connected with the Yukon through the Yukon BC Grid Connect that will increase the Yukon's energy security and affordability.
Thank you. I might have been able to do a better job. He stumbled a little bit. Don't tell him that. So here we are. Here's the project and where we're at. And so we're looking at 800 kilometers of high voltage transmission, starting at Bob Quinn Lake, up the Stuart Cassier 37 highway into Watson Lake. 500 kV. So we're looking at tying into the BC Hydro backbone. In the previous Midgard reports, this was never contemplated. It was always 287 kV. And what this means is that we can maximize the power transfer capability. I believe in the old Midgard report, we were looking at a direct line from Iskut all the way to Whitehorse with 287, which would have resulted in about 250 megawatts of power transfer capability. With 500 kV, we can transfer up to 1,000 megawatts of power back and forth. What we then need to do is at Watson Lake install an AC to DC to AC station, which then synchronizes both grids, and it allows us to control the power going back and forth. And this is a two-way line. This isn't servicing a load in the Yukon. The ultimate vision in the Yukon is to be a net exporter of power, be a Hydro-Quebec, be a Manitoba Hydro. So project goal is obviously electrifying this critical conservation corridor. You know, we would increase our peak energy supply. We would electrify 6 diesel-reliant communities and augment this renewable energy capacity, this renewable energy economy that I speak of. And then, again, critical First Nations ownership and partnership is envisioned, absolutely. Preliminary costing, I know that the estimates in the previous report were $2 billion. That was for 287 kV. This is $4 billion, 500 kV and doubling or tripling, quadrupling the power transfer capability. In the Yukon, there's a few ways we can go. We could go 500 kV up to Faro and not into Whitehorse. We could go 500 kV from Watson Lake into Whitehorse and not up to Faro. But what we're currently studying is 287, stepping down to 287, up to Faro, 287 over to Whitehorse, and then we have a redundant loop in the Yukon such that if we lose a line from a forest fire, a slide, we have that reliability of supply, which is obviously critical. We're studying the power transfer capability, but with a double line, we should be able to be very close to what the 500 kV can offer. So growing the economy, we released publicly a economic benefits report just before the election. Right now, again, there's assumptions in here. There's assumptions that are the bigger mines or anchor tenants, I would call them, or other load centers like Skagway are connected. So there's assumptions, and we can argue with those assumptions, but the bottom line is we could maximize and actually realize $7.6 billion a year in economic growth. This unlocks up to 36,000 long-term jobs over the course of this project, which is huge. But these are jobs not obviously in the Yukon. They are in the Yukon, but they're in northern BC. Manufacturing facilities, smelters, production facilities in Quebec, et cetera, shipping jobs, rail jobs. So significant economic benefit and fantastic for growing our economy. So leading clean growth, I mean, this is a part of this as well, is again, our calculation of 9 million tons of GHG gas avoidance is really surrounding, avoiding mines connecting with renewable, thermal generation. If we have a large facility like Casino or Fireweed, all of those entities have thermal generation. We're saying with a Grid Connect project, we could really avoid this amount of greenhouse gas emissions. This is the equivalent of 120,000 tanker trucks of gasoline a year, to put it in perspective. Again, debatable. These are numbers we calculated based on assumptions, and this can go up and down. But at the very least, this is something to be proud of as we move forward with this. Again, this is a two-way market for renewable energy. We're going to be able to flow renewable energy back and forth 365 days a year. And the other piece is that we believe that this will facilitate the development of local renewable projects like hydro, like wind, because there's a market to push south. Right now, the business case for these projects are only in the winter. They're only seasonal. In the summer, and I'll show you the graphs right away, we have a surplus of renewable energy. Where do we push it? We push it nowhere. We spill water. Back in a previous life when I worked for Brookfield, spilling water was not good. That meant money was going out the door. Similar here, this is money that we could be taking in the door. So electrifying diesel communities, that's a picture of Watson Lake. So, based on electrification of these communities, and this doesn't include Atlan, which I think would be a part of at some point, and possibly Skagway, which is, again, another benefit. 4.8 million liters of diesel annually, huge. I believe we calculated over the life of the project, 30 years, we would realize $1 billion in savings in fuel costs. And so that will go into the financial analysis and the modeling as we move forward. More reliable service, and then local renewable generation for use or export. If you look at Watson Lake, they have a fantastic solar initiative. They're going to be able to push power onto the grid, depending on consumption within the community. So, pretty simple graph. This is enabling Yukon's energy exports. If you see, Alberta and BC, they peak a couple times, winters and summer. But in the summer, the fantastic thing for us is that we have a low load, which means our generation, we have an excess of it, and BC and Alberta both need it. And so it's an amazing situation for us that we'll be able to facilitate, as I mentioned, these renewable energy projects to be a net exporter of power in the future. Today, and this number you know, based on where we are today with load, not load growing, which it will, we anticipate, based on a kilowatt hour number, if we sold our power back to BC today, we could realize $20 million a year. That's how much excess renewable energy we have. And obviously more so with some of the solar coming online and the wind projects, which is fantastic. The importance of collaboration. People are probably asking, you know, okay, so Major Projects Office, what's that about? And so we were part of this Northwest Conservation Corridor, a critical conservation corridor, and essentially now working with Major Projects Office. I intend on going to meet with them in 2 weeks to look at how they can support us moving forward. But essentially, you know, they are a single point of contact within the federal government rather than multiple departments, which, if people are aware, dealing with multiple departments in the federal government can be time consuming. And so this is one area where, you know, this is streamlined and part of the intention. But it also helps partnering with First Nations. We do have, you know, Kluani-Atimek is now on the Indigenous Advisory Group with the Major Projects Office. And my understanding is Justin Furby is now VP of Major Projects Office responsible for the North, which is also good because obviously Justin knows the North, knows this project, and you know, I think benefit to us. But the two key items I think getting mentioned into this office and having direct link to them is one, now individuals across, I'll say this, the world recognize that Canada is serious about this project. I've been getting a lot of calls and a lot of emails recently as a result of investors. I've had conversations with investment banking from CIBC, from Bank of Montreal. They've called back and now are very much interested in moving forward and seeing how they can be a part of this project. The second piece is really the regulatory and environmental piece. Canada has a new bill, BC has a bill, Yukon has their regulations. What we're wanting to do and in working with Yukon, working with BC and Canada, is look at harmonizing, I'll use this term, harmonizing the regulatory and permitting process. We recognize that there's only so much room we have possibly to play with regulations in the Yukon and in BC and in Canada, but at the same time we want to work with this Major Projects Office and the other provinces and territories to hopefully streamline what, you know, this process to make sure that we're able to get out the gate when we need to start to build. So next steps, really, you know, we're continuing towards, you know, a feasible, fundable project with First Nations. I mentioned before, First Nations partnerships are critical. We continue to have conversations. We do have letters of support from some First Nations along the route already. And we have signals from other nations that they want to further the conversations. The great news is that there are still conversations happening and no one is opposed to this project. Arguably, Yukon Development and myself, we haven't done a great job in educating the overall public on the project, and that's part of what we need to do in the new year. And that obviously includes First Nations. We really need to detail and get in front of individuals and provide some education on this project so everyone understands the benefits and so on and so forth. I spoke about the collaborative regulatory approach already, which is great. We're looking at our technical detailed design. And then I think the last piece really is just energy and planning and load forecasting is, you know, we need to understand and have conversations, as an example, with Skagway and the port. What does the load look like? With Casino, what does your load look like? What are you willing to commit to an extent? And so those are the conversations we had, because all of that gets bundled up and put into the financial model. What we are planning to do, and we are hopeful, is that with investment, equity investment from third party, from Canadian Infrastructure Bank, with backing of loans from the Canadian government, that rate impacts will be very minimal. I know everyone says, well, the Yukon can't afford this project. Of course not. We can't afford $4 billion. But it's not coming from the pockets of the Yukoners. This will be a funding stack that is in a number of scenarios that we push through to make it such that rates are minimally, if not impacted, I won't say zero, because that's not right, but we're thinking that the revenue streams from an industry, the revenue streams from, or the investment streams from investors, Canada backstopping alone, we believe that rates will be minimally impacted. And so in closing, still have some time left. Hopefully that doesn't open up for questions, because I'm sure there's a few. But anyways, I'm honestly not going to run out the door. I'll be walking around, so if anyone wants to ask questions, they can after. This is from our economic benefits report. So reliable electricity for critical mineral development. This is what this project is about. Continued electrification of homes and transportation. First Nations owned renewable energy facilities and clean electricity exports to the rest of Canada. These can power our northern communities in a new energy economy, and it all starts with the Yukon BC Grid Connect.